The final showdown between Demi Vollering and Annemiek van Vleuten on the famous Tourmalet, a new champion to be unveiled. This was the Tour de France Femmes avec Zwift Queen stage, the 90k stage we've been waiting for, finishing on Tourmalet. They go over the Col d'Aspin first, which is about 12k, 6.5%. That's hard. That's usually the hardest climb in a lot of the Women's World Tour races. And then they do 17k's at like 8% up Tourmalet. So how would Kopecky survive such a stage with Vollering, her teammate, the favourite to win? But she's, started the stage 12 seconds behind the champ, the world champ, Annemiek van Vleuten. So breakaways tried mostly unsuccessfully to get up the road before Aspin in the hour and a half beforehand, and then they got onto it. And it was, what was Movistar going to do? They have probably the better dedicated climbing domestiques compared to SD Works. And we got an answer pretty quickly with old Bionic going to the front to set a heavy rhythm to try and thin it out. But, Vollering and SD Works and Royster and Kopecky, they seem really relaxed. Like Kopecky's getting a bit on, Vollering's sitting on Royster's wheel. She's not even, bothering to sit on Van Vleuten's wheel. Lebu's kind of pushing a little bit. She pushed too much wind early on this climb. And then Patino takes over. Still, Vollering just letting Royster close gaps for her, and, Patino is the last woman usually for Van Vleuten, although Lippett's still in the group. So it's go time pretty shortly, and so Movistar and Van Vleuten wanted to make it a hard race. They wanted her to launch early again, obviously, which, after Covadonga in La Vuelta, where Vollering was the better climber, we'd see how that would pay off, and Lippett comes to the front to do one last hard lead out for a couple of minutes for Van Vleuten with a bloodied knee she'd crashed earlier in the stage. And now was the moment of truth. How superior was Van Vleuten? Had her powers compared to the peloton diminished? Had others gotten better, like we saw in La Vuelta? And still, Vollering and Royster, they're behind Lebu, Niewiadoma, Moolman, chilling when Van Vleuten attacks halfway through the Col d'Aspin. Vollering closes it easily, and we have our trio of the best climbers in the race. Van Vleuten pacing, though, because Kopecky's behind. So Vollering doesn't really need to pull through. Her teammates in the yellow jersey. She's got Royster in that group. AVV's got to take time and keep Kopecky behind. Kopecky almost struggled more on Aspin than the Tourmalet later, and if you compared the facial expressions, which is a dangerous thing to do, but Vollering looked very, very comfortable, with Lebu actually shouldering probably 80% of the workload, chasing. Moolman gave her a few pulls too, and AVV still pulling. Eventually, though, maybe she coaxed her into it. Maybe Niewiadoma wanted to lock up the podium spot. She started pulling, so Niewiadoma feeling good. In fact, looking back at AVV, you're looking a bit suspect here. Vollering's still completely focused on Van Vleuten, not closing a single gap for her, not really letting AVV go behind her at all. And at the QOM sprint, Niewiadoma actually secures the Maillot Pois. She'd secure that later. The other group nearly a minute behind, and here things got really interesting. Niewiadoma, look at her line. She goes really wide, just much better lines than Annemiek van Vleuten, who tries to hit this corner, quite a sharp one, much narrower. And we saw Niewiadoma and Lippett's descending were outstanding in one of the earlier stages into the base of a 3k climb on that wet descent. And she straight up drops Van Vleuten and Vollering on this descent. Yes, Vollering tries to get across, and she closes the gap a little bit. And then Niewiadoma puts her on another gap, and now it levels off and it's not as technical on the Tourmalet descent, and you really have to pedal, and the two big guns start to neutralize each other, with Royster and Kopecky not far behind. Vollering stops pulling, plays a risky game and says, can you come back up? How far behind are you? Can you just come pull this valley for me? And Van Vleuten's not going to pull this valley with Demi Vollering in the wheel. In fact, look at her. She breaks here. She breaks Vollering as she's stretching her back to come through and take a pull. So Niewiadoma, who's just looked extremely strong on Aspin, maybe the second strongest, goes clear in this valley and gets gifted a minute head start, with the two big guns talking to each other and waiting for now Royster chasing behind. The problem for Niewiadoma was, yes, this is a super hard climb, but look at the first third of it. Look at the first 4 or 5Ks. They're not that steep. She's really light. She's a climber. And SD Works and every other GC contender have Royster on the front mowing her down, and she lost a lot of time to Royster. She's pushing, way more watts at this point compared to Van Vleuten and Vollering. And look at the gap, 10 seconds. Royster brought it down to even less, in fact, when she pulled off with about 12 k's to go on the climb, and it happens again. Vollering not wanting to close the gap entirely to Niewiadoma. She stops pulling, and Niewiadoma, now that we're on the 9% gradients in her terrain, is pacing against Lebu, and the gap goes from 8 seconds to 14 seconds, even out to 50 seconds again, with Vollering not pacing at all. And we're thinking, are SD works? Whilst you see Niewiadoma, she's just trying to maintain 250 watts, probably 5.1, 5.2 watts per kilo. Are SD works trying to keep Kopecky in the GC lead, or is Vollering just being patient, or what's the go here? And we still have a long time left in this climb, over 20 minutes at this point with Lebu pacing. Eventually we get our answer. Vollering hits Annemiek van Vleuten with the look, 5.6 k's to go, and absolutely launches the last 6 k's and 20 minutes of the Tourmalet. This is going to over 2,100 meters, and within a very short period of time, 150 meters, Annemiek van Vleuten shakes her head and says, no mas. And at this moment, with this long left in the climb, over 20 minutes, and a gap already opening up, and her teammate, in fact, Kopecky, dropped behind, we knew a new queen was going to be crowned, with Niewiadoma being chased in the fog by the spectre of Demi Vollering, who gets across to her and goes past her pretty quickly. So with the asymmetry of the pacing of this climb, so Vollering did like 5.5 plus watts per kilo for the last 20 minutes, and that's at higher altitude too, much slower in the first 2/3 of this climb. She puts a huge gap into everybody. One of the most impressive performances in women's cycling ever, and the scary thing is she might have been able to go even faster on the Tourmalet. The best performance we have in our climbing database, and Vollering just kept extending the gap. Awesome to see the fans on the side of the road. It was like 9:30 at night, foggy conditions, probably cold as well, and Vollering just smashing it with a new champion-elect, riding away with the Tour de France Femmes avec Zwift GC in the fog. Iconic images, historical level performance, and much deserved from her, taking the yellow jersey off her teammate Lotte Kopecky, winning the stage by a monster 2 minutes on Niewiadoma, 2:34 on Van Vleuten. That gap created in just 6 kilometers. Kopecky holding on well for 6th on the stage, but with a 150 gap on Niewiadoma and 2:28 on Van Vleuten, with a 30-minute time trial tomorrow, the GC should be wrapped up, barring incidents for Demi Vollering. Been a bit of a rocky week for them this week, SD Works. Not everything gone to plan, but today, when you got legs like that, doesn't really matter. Easily the best. I can't wait to see what she does in the future. I hope you enjoy the video. I'll see you with the TT recap tomorrow. Ciao.